But, Madam Speaker, I would ask tonight that we give respect and prayer and ask that the President please understand that the most vulnerable that are there still need others to be of assistance. And we need to make sure that this country heals itself with love, respect, and admiration for each other. I want to thank the young congressman for his time tonight, for his bringing forth this opportunity to speak about where our country is. And I want him to know that I personally admire him and respect him and appreciate his sound call for a voice of reason and opportunity for America's future. May God bless our country. I thank the gentleman for allowing me time to speak.
Well, I think my friend from Texas, particularly thank him for referring to me as young. I'll take it. Interestingly, it was, and I'll probably have more to say about this when we're back in July. It was 10 years ago in July that I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma with a 4-month-old daughter and a not quite 2-year-old son. Not 100% sure whether I was going to be able to do like I did this last weekend and go see my son play Little League Baseball and see my daughter go off to camp last week. That'll shift your worldview a little bit, as they say, about what's important and what's not important. And I can tell you that my dedication to public service was fully renewed after getting through that. And I was very blessed, and I got through cancer-free in a matter of months, and Lord willing, I'm still cancer-free. But there's plenty of wood around here, but I knocked on my head instead. But I am honored that you would take the time to come down here and join me and say such nice things. And I know that the gentleman knows that, part of the purpose here is our collective desire in this body to do what is right for this country. And what I cannot for the life of me understand is why my Democrat colleagues continue to insist on using this body to stoke division and to separate us by race, by sex, by wherever we come from, all the different ways you can possibly come up with to divide us, rather than finding ways for us to unite together to protect, defend, secure, advance this country going forward. And my colleagues from Texas know. I know my friend from Texas knows. It has been a full 90 days since the Vice President of the United States was tapped by the President of the United States to be in charge of the border, yet the Vice President has not taken a second to come to the Rio Grande, to come to the Rio Grande Valley, to come to the border. Now, it wouldn't be enough just to come. And by the way, if the Vice President is listening, it's not enough just to go. But it sure would be nice if you could find the southern border on a map and get in your taxpayer-funded airplane and take a direct flight down to the border and go take the time to meet with Texans, to go take the time to meet with migrants, to go take the time to meet with local leaders and see what's actually happening in real time at the border. I know the gentleman knows full well we just had 180,000 apprehensions in May. We've had over 700,000 apprehensions this year. We've had over 200,000 gotaways. Border Patrol estimates 1,000 gotaways every single day coming through between the ports of entry because our Border Patrol is now running processing centers in McAllen. Now, we all know this. We know this. I believe the Vice President knows this. And I sent the Vice President a memo outlining this just in case she doesn't know. But it's happening to us in real time, and it's happening to migrants in real time, and it's happening to ranchers in real time. I know my friends from Texas know that we've had 7,500 pounds of fentanyl. 7,500 pounds of fentanyl that has been intercepted by Border Patrol. Fentanyl is killing our children. And what are we going to vote on this week? What are we going to do this week? I don't even know. I flew back here to Texas. I got half my colleagues still voting by proxy, even though we're not wearing masks, and apparently we're still voting by proxy by saying, I'm voting proxy because of the pandemic. We're not even having half of our committee meetings because people are, we're doing them virtually. We're doing them when we're home in our work periods. Why are we here? Why are we here when there's 7,500 pounds of fentanyl pouring into our border? That's just the stuff we're catching, by the way. Do you know how many children are dying with marijuana that's been laced with fentanyl? I mean, it's happening right now. You hear about like 80,000, 90,000 opioid deaths over the last year. You know where that stuff's coming from? Why did Governor DeSantis send resources to Texas to help secure our border? People said, well, why would you do that? That's Texas. Because the meth and the drugs that are coming into Florida are coming through the southwest border. And anybody who follows it knows that to be true. And why is that? Because the cartels that are now running the border profit immensely by moving human beings for profit and by moving fentanyl for profit. The cartel Jalisco New Generation just absorbed the Reynosa faction and just absorbed the cartel del Noreste of Los Zetas and Nuevo Laredo, and they now have operational control of Tamaulipas. And that is a dangerous cartel, and they are moving fentanyl for profit and moving human beings for profit, millions of dollars a day. We know this to be true. We know this from law enforcement agents on the ground, Texans, federal authorities, Border Patrol, ICE. But they're not able to do their job because they're running processing facilities. Processing facilities for human beings that we say we're helping. Because we're saying that we're giving them asylum, which, by the way, they're not claiming asylum under the statute as the asylum laws were meant to provide. Right? They come across the river and there's a sign on trees at the Rio Grande, which, by the way, the vice president and my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would know this if they bothered to go to the Rio Grande. But you walk down to the river and there's a sign, and it says asilo with an arrow, and it points to a bunch of bright lights sitting under the bridge saying, go over there. When I was at the river and I met about 50 migrants at about midnight, there was a group of them, and they were lost. They were going around in circles. So I drove my truck down the path so they'd have light in the dark so they could get to the processing center. These are good people seeking a better life. Asked every single one of them why they were coming here. It was for a job and opportunity. It wasn't for asylum under our laws. And we are making a mockery of our laws by saying that anyone who wants to come to our country for opportunity, God bless them, I understand why. I probably would too. If you look at the opportunity you have here as opposed to El Salvador or Guatemala or Honduras right now, I understand. But we're turning our laws upside down. That's not what asylum laws are for. So why don't we just sit down and figure it out? Right? Because you can't just say wide open borders. You can't. It's irresponsible. Listen to the leaders of Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. They say it's irresponsible because it's devastating their own countries. We say, well, why don't they fix it? Well, we should have policies and work with them to try to fix it. But you know what would fix it the most? If we didn't have a wide open border. If we actually stood up and said, sorry, y'all, you can't just come in unless you actually qualify under our asylum laws, which is a fraction, a tiny fraction of the 700,000 plus apprehensions that we have apprehended since January 1. But why aren't we here debating that? Why aren't we coming up with a solution to this problem so that migrants aren't being abused as I speak by cartels so that they can make money? This is the greatest country in the history of the world, but we allow that to occur. We allow that to occur. And we do so in the name of compassion. We do so when people stand up and say, oh, well, we want to make sure these folks can get here. Meanwhile, we have people scream kids in cages. Anybody remember that? Anybody remember the kids in cages? How many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle ran to the cameras, sat in hearings, screamed kids in cages? The very structures put in place by the Obama-Biden administration, fact, everybody knows it, that's who created the chain link barriers in these facilities at the border. Nobody blamed Obama and Biden for doing that. Airflow, ability to see the migrants, protect them. Oh no, everybody went down and said kids in cages. Why? Because we had a massive influx. Right? They said, oh, they're drinking out of toilets. It was a lie. They weren't drinking out of toilets. They were drinking out of a device that had the water fountain on the top with a toilet down below. We have them in facilities all in our prisons, facilities, places where we have people coming in. The water supply in the bathroom right off of this floor is connected to the same water supply between the toilet and the sink. It's a pipe behind the drywall. Yet they went around saying kids drinking out of toilets. It's shameful. We can't have a rational conversation about what's actually happening in Texas. It's bad. There are children in stash houses right now. Why are we sitting here doing nothing? Why are we going to have a vote this week on 2 suspension bills in a quest to go after more wokeness for, I think it's some LGBTQ, I think small business bill or something on a suspension that failed to get through on the 2/3 vote? Okay, debate that, have it out. They tried to get it through on suspension. Didn't get through. So we're going to do a rule. We won't have any real debate on it, by the way. Everything the American people see in here, this is all a sham. There is no actual debate on the floor of this body. And anybody wants to come debate me on that, I'm happy to debate it. There is no debate on the floor of the people's house, ever. We haven't had an amendment on the floor of the House of Representatives, the people's house, since May of 2016 that was in order an open debate on the floor of the House. So that any one of my colleagues could walk down here and say, hey, I got an idea. There's a bill. You know what I'd like to do? I'd like to change something in the bill. Here's an amendment. I'd like to send it to the desk. Offer my amendment. Hey, what do you think about my amendment? It might make the bill better. You know what I'd like to have had a debate on that? Last Friday, I would have liked to have had a debate on the Juneteenth bill. Why? Because the purpose of that bill was excellent. The fulfillment of the Declaration of Independence with the ending of slavery, which we recognize in Texas because of Juneteenth. I didn't support the bill because I didn't think the title was good. There were some other factors. But I didn't support it, and I would have liked to have amended it. Never get a chance to do it. Ever. I would have liked the ability to amend it, but couldn't do it. All right, so you're forced with an up or down vote. We have 2,000-page bills that are $2 trillion. They're dropped on the floor, and they say, take it or leave it. And I said, well, you know what? I'd like to cut something, or I'd like to add something. Can't do it. I can go up to the Rules Committee. I can say, here's my thing, and it gets voted down in Rules Committee. When you see amendments on the floor of the House, it's all a fraud, ladies and gentlemen. It is all a fraud. They are hand-picked amendments designed to make it look like we're amending. But we're not. It's 15 amendments from the majority, 5 amendments from the minority. Bam. Hey, look at that. That's debate. We're killing our country by partisan dropping of bills, no matter who's in the majority, by the way. I said we'd had an amendment on the floor since 2016. Guess who was in control of the House for 2 years of that? Republicans. When are we going to actually sit down and debate this stuff and actually do the things that matter? Again, I go home to Texas, and everybody's saying, how can you possibly allow this to be occurring on our border? It is the fundamental duty of the federal government to secure the border of the United States, and yet we have fentanyl pouring in. We have cartels who run the border. We have Mexico becoming a narco-terrorist state. We have danger to citizens in our country actually occurring. We have human trafficking and sex trafficking occurring in San Antonio, Austin, all the way up through I-35, going over to Houston. We stop cars in the San Antonio suburbs that have 9 immigrants in them going to a stash house in Houston, driven by an American citizen employee of a cartel. I offered an op-ed explaining that to the San Antonio Express News, along with the district attorney of Kendall County, Texas, and the San Antonio Express News wouldn't print it. A fact-based op-ed. We ended up printing it in National Review or someplace online. Who wants to have a conversation about this stuff? The American people do. Everybody I talk to in Texas knows this is real. But here we are. And we have a House body that is more interested in, and frankly, an administration that's more interested in advancing wokeness every single day than in addressing a wide open border that endangers us and the migrants who seek to come here. I can't emphasize that enough. A wide open border that endangers American citizens, endangers our children, and endangers the migrants who seek to come here, which my colleagues on the other side of the aisle pat themselves on the back in the false name of compassion that open borders is somehow good for migrants. And it's a lie. It is a blatant lie. And instead, what are we going to get? We're going to get a so-called infrastructure bill next week, which will come through here on partisan lines. And what are we going to have in there? There's the provisions and programs that prioritize funding based on race, ethnicity, gender, and socially disadvantaged status. One provision that finds that race and gender-neutral efforts alone are insufficient. Bill includes a study on how federal infrastructure planning exacerbated systemic racial, regional, social, environmental, and economic injustices. We have a bill that establishes 41 new federal programs, $20 million a year for implicit bias research and training grants related to racial profiling, $5 million a year for a program to increase transportation job awareness and diversity, a carbon pollution reduction program. On the international stage, what do we see? Our own diplomats are undermining the greatness of America. You've got Linda Thomas Greenfield, the ambassador to the United Nations, who said that racial equity is her top focus and that white supremacy is weaved into our founding documents and principles. Our adversaries like Russia and China are weaponizing the leftist agenda. At the summit in Alaska, Secretary Blinken brought up China's imprisonment of millions of Uyghur Muslims, and China responded by arguing that the U.S. is not much different, mentioning Black Lives Matter. The Uyghurs, get the military and veterans, instead of working to develop a lethal battle-ready force that will kill people and destroy things when called up to do so, which is the purpose of a military, under the guise of reviewing extremism within the ranks of the military, in March, Special Operations Command hired the first Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. We've seen examples of West Point cadets forced to attend critical race theory presentations. A Space Force officer was fired for saying, quote, "The diversity, inclusion, and equity industry and the trainings we are receiving in the military is rooted in critical race theory, which is rooted in Marxism." The Biden VA will now be using American taxpayer dollars to cover sex reassignment surgery. I had multiple parents of the kids that I was able, or 18-year-olds that I was able to nominate to go to the academies, and we had a celebration in San Antonio, and every single one of the parents were coming up and showing me these videos from the Air Force Academy, West Point Academy, talking about, people having two moms and two dads and all of this woke training. For heaven's sake, it's a military. I mean, China and Russia is just looking at us and saying, what in the world? Well, they're licking their chops. You got critical race theory in education. We're seeing a large-scale effort to impose tyranny over the minds of our children through taxpayer-funded indoctrination. In Evanston, Illinois, students listened to Not My Idea, a book about whiteness, which states that whiteness is a bad deal and always was, and that you can be white without signing into whiteness. In Cupertino, California, third graders were required to deconstruct their racial identities and then rank themselves according to their power and privilege. In Oregon, ethnic standards will require kindergartners to understand their own identity groups, including but not limited to race, gender, family, ethnicity, culture, religion, and ability. An advisory board linked to Virginia's Loudoun County Public School District demanded that teachers be dismissed if they criticize the district's equity training inspired by critical race theory. We saw that the fellow that was removed or told that he had to be suspended in Loudoun County, I think he was finally restored because he dared speak up about this. Meanwhile, you've got woke corporations all across America and their corporate boards moving the Major League Baseball All-Star Game from Atlanta, Georgia, which is 50% black, to 10% Denver. I bet all those white Coloradans driving around with their Subarus and patting themselves on the back while they go hiking with a rainbow flag on the back of their car or something, feel good about themselves, instead of celebrating Hank Aaron in Atlanta, Georgia. Why? Because Georgia was moving an election reform bill with laws that were almost identical to Colorado. But Major League Baseball said, oh no, we're going to go join the woke brigade, and we're going to go forward and we're going to say we're going to move everything to Colorado. Nothing was proved by that other than Major League Baseball's wokeness. Talked about border security. And I talked about that because it's so critical to the people of Texas. We can talk about the other things that are critical. All these programs I just talked about, people ask, well, Congressman Roy, why do you come down here and often vote no? because almost every single bill dropped on this floor of this House spends money we don't have, adds regulations that's going to kill small businesses, divides us by race, or adds more laws to the books. Does anybody think we need more laws, more spending when we're $30 trillion in debt? I just once would like to see an actual debate with the 435 members representing the American people in this chamber about what in the world we're going to do about $30 trillion in debt. But we got nothing. We got an empty chamber. The American people can hear my voice echoing. We're not going to actually have a debate about it. We're going to just spend more money. Just a race to see who can spend more money. Does anybody have any belief that we're not endangering our kids and grandkids? I mean, somebody wants to come down here and expound on modern monetary theory about how spending all this money is absolutely fine. I mean, I'm happy to listen. Most people in America don't believe it. $30 trillion in debt soon. $6 trillion spent in the last year. Do you know how much it cost to win all of World War II? $4.1 trillion in current dollars. We just spent $6 trillion in a year. Appropriated. We'll spend it out a little over a year. $6 trillion. Shutting down small businesses, closing our schools. We have 100,000 small businesses closed. 100,000. And now we're paying people more not to work than to work. Why do you suppose the Vice President of the United States refuses to come to the southern border? Why do you suppose the Vice President of the United States or the President refuses to go to the southern border and refuses to take me up in my offer to debate the Vice President anywhere, anytime about the border? Because she knows, and the President knows, they have zero defense for our current border policies. There is literally no ability to defend the current border policies of the United States. It's laughable. A high school debate team would destroy the president or the vice president in a debate about our current border, because it is so unbelievably unforgivable to turn our borders over to cartels. But that is what this administration has done. And again, look, it's all tied back together. This is all in the name of supposed compassion for people and a continued desire to try to drive a wedge and say that, oh, Republicans just don't want those brown people to come here across our river. That's what it's about. That's the purpose of the fight and the divide. Meanwhile, ask any Border Patrol agent, ask anybody along the Rio Grande, ask anybody who's being affected by it, ask any of the migrants about what's happening, how it's happening, about the journey. And I'm not saying that migrants that are coming don't want to be here. They do. But look into the eyes of the little 7-year-old girl on the border that I looked into who had no mom, no dad, no uncle, no aunt, no brother, no sister, nobody with her. But we don't care. We say, oh, it's all fine. It's all fine for us to have a system in which a 7-year-old girl takes a journey by herself from Guatemala through Mexico in the hands of the cartels to get to our border. We say that's fine. I can't state enough, and the reason I'm using this time, and I'm sorry I went a little longer than the time I thought I was going to use because my friend from Texas used a little more time, and I appreciated his being here. But every single person I talk to in Texas views this through the lens of an existential crisis. And yet it is absolute silence from the administration in this body. People wonder why Governor Abbott is starting to say he's going to take it upon himself and the state to build a wall or to fund resources at the border. We've had to do it for years, by the way, basically $1 billion a year. Texas has been, or at least per session, that has been funding technology. Do you know how many often the Border Patrol was using technology funded by Texans? Cameras, because their Border Patrol cameras weren't working, radios. And now the governor's going down there and saying he's going to do a lot of this. Now Texas has got to figure out how to fund it. But it's our border. It's our communities. Yet crickets, absolute crickets, devastating crickets from the Democrat-led House of Representatives and the Democrats in the White House, President Biden and Vice President Harris, who refuse to even come to the border. I don't know. The longer this goes on, I get it why the vice president won't go to the border. How could you look any American in the eye and say, you're doing your constitutional duty to defend the United States of America and secure our borders? Does anybody understand in this chamber and comprehend how bad it is for our future and the future of our neighbors to the south to empower cartels the way we're empowering them? Instead of being able to compete with China by having a robust free trade throughout the Western Hemisphere, to be able to have a strong Mexico that isn't a narco-terror state, that we can partner with countries throughout the Western Hemisphere and compete against China and not have this pressure valve coming to our border. Instead, we are damaging these countries, empowering narco-terror state in Mexico, empowering cartels, weakening our country, and endangering Americans. My friend from the House Judiciary Committee is here. I'm about to give my time up. I'll give you a little warning here in a couple minutes. I'm about to yield. I appreciate the work that he is doing with my friend from Colorado, trying to navigate the complexity of antitrust laws with respect to the size of massive companies, particularly massive big tech companies. And we're going to have a pretty robust day, I think, tomorrow in the House Judiciary Committee. I do want to thank him, since we're here in the chamber together, for the work he's doing to try to address that. I don't know if I'll agree with every bill tomorrow. I know I'm going to support at least one or two. We'll see what happens during the process of amending and debating. What I would say to my friend is it would be great if we could address every issue with both sides of the aisle engaging and offering amendments and restore regular order so that we can try to get to the heart and the truth of these issues. We're never going to deal with our spending issues in this country if we don't sit down and roll our sleeves up like a family or a small business has to do. We're never going to address something like the border if we don't sit down and give and take and offer solutions that will work. We're never going to solve health care. We're never going to be able to have a strong national defense without, by the way, being involved in endless conflicts. I joined with my Democrats last week on a measure involving our presence in Iraq. I think we can find agreement at times if we'll sit down and do it. But we can't bury our head in the sand and ignore existential crises and hope that they'll just go away. So I'll just close by renewing my call to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the Vice President and the President. Let's actually focus on these crises like the border, and let's actually do our job and our constitutional duty to address them. Let's actually do what we said we were going to do when we took our oaths to the Constitution of the United States and we said we wanted to be a part of the people's house, to debate, to amend, to vote. I'm not afraid of what we're going to do tomorrow, to my friend. We're going to offer bills, we're going to debate, we're going to amend, we're going to vote. We should do that on the floor of this House. Madam Speaker, we should do that on the floor of this House. With that, I yield back.